All right, so today we're going to put together something like a field guide. We're looking at a really powerful way people in India talk about, or more accurately, don't talk about, caste. We're going to break down all the common arguments you hear for why one of the world's oldest social hierarchies just isn't a problem anymore.
So, here's a question you hear all the time. With modern laws, sprawling cities, a global economy, has the caste system finally become a thing of the past? This question is right at the heart of our explainer because, wow, the way people answer it tells you so much.
And that gets us to this key idea: caste negation. Now, this isn't just about someone ignoring caste. It's way more specific. It's a whole toolbox of rhetorical tactics that people use to make caste seem old, unimportant, or like a problem that's been totally blown out of proportion. Let's start breaking down what these arguments actually look like.
Okay, so the first and probably the most common strategy is this one: declaring the problem solved. The argument pretty much goes that once India became independent and wrote its constitution, the problem was legally fixed, and now it's just, slowly fading into the background.
I bet you've heard some version of this, right? It's a very neat way of putting the problem in a box. It says caste is only a thing in certain places, like villages, or with certain people, like the uneducated. The implication is clear. It has no place in the world of modern urban professionals. But how true is that really?
And here's where things get interesting. When you put the claim right next to the data, on one side, you have this idea of a post-caste world. But on the other, you've got this mountain of evidence that often gets ignored in these conversations. I mean, overwhelming numbers of people still marrying within their caste, documented violence, and just undeniable patterns of who gets to the top in major industries and institutions.
Now, this whole "it's in the past" idea, it also has a more personal flavor. And that's the caste blindness narrative. This is when someone says that on a personal level, they just don't see a caste. And on the surface, this sounds great, doesn't it? It sounds progressive. It's all about merit, about individualism. But the subtext is, hey, if I don't see it or practice it, then it can't be a real systemic problem. And this is where we run into a really crucial idea: privilege denial. You see, when people from upper caste backgrounds say they don't see caste, it's often because their own caste has never held them back. Their own experience feels normal, neutral, like the default setting. And that makes it incredibly hard to see the systemic hurdles that other people are facing every single day.
All right, next up, we have our second major strategy. And this one is a real mind-bender: reverse victimhood. This is all about taking policies like affirmative action, which were created to fix historical inequality, and flipping them around to sound like they're actually discriminating against dominant groups.
Just look at how the language gets flipped on its head here. A policy that was about corrective justice gets twisted into sacrificing merit. Talking about historical oppression somehow becomes a story about upper caste victimhood, and a tool designed to address systemic bias gets a new label: reverse casteism. The entire conversation is hijacked. It moves away from the original injustice and focuses instead on the supposed suffering of the privileged. Okay, so our third strategy is a bit different. Instead of saying the problem is gone, these arguments try to change what the problem even is. They try to shift the focus completely away from the social hierarchy itself. You hear this one all the time. Oh, it's not about caste, it's really just about money, it's a class issue. The idea is, if we just fix poverty, caste will magically disappear. But that completely misses the point, that caste itself is often what determines who gets access to money, to education, to the right networks in the first place. It's a barrier that exists even when you take economics out of the equation.
Then there's the other angle: redefining caste as just, harmless culture. You'll hear it talked about as community pride or family background, almost like it's just a quaint tradition. But this framing makes things like only marrying within your caste seem totally normal, while completely sidestepping how those very practices are what keep the whole system of inequality going. Okay, on to our fourth category: tactics of dismissal. These are the moves people use to just shut the conversation down, usually by using a personal story or a clever rhetorical trick to make the big picture data seem irrelevant.
And you'll notice a few common plays here. First, there's the classic "I have a Dalit friend" argument, right? Using one personal anecdote to try and disprove a massive social pattern. Then there's the move to say, oh, you can't compare caste to race, it's a totally unique Indian thing, which conveniently shields it from global criticism. And then there's the ultimate reversal: victim blaming.
And wow, this quote right here, it's a perfect example of that last point, the victim blaming. The burden of fixing a social structure that's been around for centuries is suddenly put on the shoulders of the very people who are being crushed by it, instead of on the system that's doing the crushing.
Okay, so we've just covered a lot of ground. 4 big ways people negate caste. So what? Why does any of this matter? Why is it so important to be able to spot these arguments in the wild?
When you look at all these arguments together, you start to see a pattern. The common thread is that they all focus on the individual instead of the system. They're built on personal feelings, on anecdotes, on this ideal of meritocracy, all while conveniently ignoring the structural data. It creates a really compelling story, but it's a story that crashes headfirst into reality.
Okay, I want you to just look at this number. 90%.
So what is that? 90% of what? Well, that's the percentage of marriages in India that still happen inside the same caste. It's just one stark, simple stat that slices right through so many of the arguments we've talked about. It shows that no matter what people say about living in a post-caste world, the fundamental lines dividing society are still incredibly powerful.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? The most crucial takeaway is this. Arguing that caste is over doesn't actually make it go away. All these strategies, denying the problem, downplaying it, shifting the blame, they all end up doing the same thing. They protect the hierarchy. They keep it safe from being questioned and from ever really changing.
So that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. This whole time we've been talking about language, about arguments, claims, and phrases, and it really makes you wonder, how much of our social reality is shaped not just by what is, but by what we say is? Thanks for tuning in.